Hello and welcome to the Wheel of Watercolour, Ruby Tuesday Art's first and possibly only watercolour quiz show, where I ask you to guess which 3 household items you can use as watercolour art supplies and you don't even know it. Now, by the way, there's no prize for this quiz or any correct answers, other than simply the permission to use these household items for your watercolour painting and to not worry about buying fancy, expensive art supplies, because you're better off to use what you've already got or whatever you can access and afford if you don't need to buy anything. All right, the first item, here are your clues. You likely use this item every single day. You probably have a whole stack of them. You may have received them as a housewarming style gift. And finally, kids have the tendency to break them. Now, I'll give you a second to write down your answer. The answer is a dinner plate. You can use this as a palette to mix up all of your beautiful watercolor colors and you don't have to spend a cent. And really you can use any ceramic dish or vessel, plate, whatever. But I use a white ceramic plate so that when I'm mixing my colors, I can see exactly what colors I have mixed because they show up really well on the white. And I would recommend setting aside a plate for this and not necessarily eating off it again, just to be safe. So I'll show you what I mean in practice. So most watercolor paint palettes come with some kind of mixing palette. So for example, if you buy paints in discs that stack together, most of the time you can use their lids for color mixing. Or if you buy a folding palette, which you decant your tubes of paint into, you can also use the lids of most of these as well. They'll have little grooves and spots dedicated for mixing your colors. But sometimes these are either too small or you just don't have them, especially if you buy the tubes of paint but you don't actually have the folding palette. This is where your plate comes in. So if you've got tubes of paint to put them into, you can just put blobs. You can dab some blobs of the paint directly onto the plate and mix them from there. Or if you do have your paints that have already come in discs or trays or whatever, or you've already decanted your tubes of paint, whatever the case, you can still use your plate for color mixing by just mixing up your colors on here. If your lid's too small, that kind of thing. And this is my favorite part. When you're done, you can leave the plate with the paint mixed on it to dry. You don't have to worry about wrapping it up with Glad Wrap or anything like that. Just leave them to dry. You can come back in later and reactivate them with your wet paintbrush. You don't need to stress about them drying out because that's the point anyway. So unlike acrylic and maybe oil, I've never tried oil to be honest, you don't have to stress too much. You can just let it dry in the plate, go, make a cup of tea, forget about it for a few hours, come back later and get painting again. My only advice would be if you're leaving it for longer than, I don't know, a day, maybe just chuck a tea towel over the top to stop any dust and things falling onto the plate, because if you reactivate the paint with dust on it, it'll be in your paint, it'll be on your page, and it's a mess. Happens to me all the time. If you do forget to cover it up and you leave your plate palette around for a few days and it gets a bit dusty, just brush it off with your hand and you're good to go. Seriously, one of the main things I love about watercolor is the lack of mess, even though I say the messier the better, but that's when you're actually painting. In terms of cleaning up mucky palettes, making sure you don't let your paint dry out and stuff, watercolor is the best. It's great for people like me who have ADHD and tend to forget to look after their art supplies. And finally, when you are ready to clean up your palette, all you have to do is run it under some water like you would normally. Just make sure it doesn't end up back in with the other plates that you're gonna eat off. Okay, mystery item number 2. And your clues are, you probably have heaps of these as well. You also might have received these as a housewarming, birthday, or wedding gift. And hopefully you put them through the washing machine all the time. And as a bonus clue, I actually got one for my birthday this year from my mum. And I loved it so much that I actually framed it instead of using it for its intended purpose. That's your bonus clue. Give you a second to think about it. The answer is tea towels, or honestly any cloth that's pale. The same reason that I use a white plate as a palette is so that I can see the colors when I test them out. So I use a tea towel or a cloth. I used to use paper towel, but it was very wasteful. So really anything that's reusable, absorbent, and you don't mind getting paint stains on it. Basically, I use this while I'm painting to dab my brush on there and just check what colors I've got before I put them on the page, to get any excess water off the brush, and also to dab up any spills, or if I put too much water on the page, I can use my cloth to dab it up. Actually, I'll show you one that's covered in paint. This is actually a bamboo cloth. It comes in a roll like paper towel, but then you can put them in the washing machine and stuff. So I've used this for several different paintings, just like refolding it different ways. It's almost ready to put in the washing machine. I could probably still use this section or even the back. It just needs to have enough white space on it that you can test out your colors. But once it gets, I guess, to looking like this, you can just chuck it in the washing machine and keep using it again and again. Okay, the final item. So the first clue is you almost always buy these with something delicious inside them. They can be made of plastic or glass, and if you're like me, you probably have millions of them in your cupboard because you hang on to them just in case there might be a reason to use them. Although you can actually put them in the recycling, but I tend to just hold on to them. And the answer is an old jam jar, or any jar. I use 2 jars of water, and I'll put a link to the video about why I use 2. I just use old jars from the cupboard, usually ones that the lid's missing, and use them again and again and again. They also are great to store your brushes in. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I don't know why I'm using my hands so much. I feel like a wiggle. But I say this all the time. You don't need fancy art supplies to get started with watercolor. Honestly, I have so many beautiful ceramic and other fancy palettes and art supplies, but then I go back to using this very dinner plate as my palette for whatever reason, because I can't find them or they need cleaning and things like that. And you also don't need heaps of art supplies either. Just don't look at my stash of brushes. It's been 10 years of me accumulating them. You don't need heaps and heaps of paints and heaps of brushes. You just need a handful of things and you can build on it from there. I hope you enjoyed this quiz. If you want to keep learning from me and learn about what watercolor supplies you actually need and don't need and how to set them up so you can get started, as well as the 3 main techniques that I recommend for getting started with watercolor to help you avoid the overwhelm of working out what to learn first, let alone how to do it. I've actually made a course all about this. It's normally $112, but I've got a coupon code so you can get it for just $12, which is ridiculous, I know, but I really just want you to be able to get started and learn watercolor quickly so that you can gain confidence. And I'm keeping it really simple so you don't get overwhelmed. For more information and for the coupon code, all of the info is in the video description, and I'm really excited to get painting with you.